Before Sleeping Beauty became a story about true love's kiss, it was a story about inevitability. In medieval Europe, death was not an interruption of life, it was its constant companion. Child mortality rates were staggering. Illness spread without understanding. A fever could turn fatal overnight. A single injury could rot into death. People did not ask if tragedy would come, but when. In this world, prophecy did not feel mystical or romantic. It felt observational. Those who claimed to see the future often seemed accurate because the patterns of suffering were so consistent. War followed famine. Famine followed winter. Death followed birth with frightening regularity. To predict disaster was not magic. It was experience. This is the world into which Sleeping Beauty was born. Her story does not begin with romance or hope, but with fear shaped by realism. A royal child was not just a daughter. She was a political future. Her survival meant stability. Her death could mean war. Celebration at her birth carried anxiety beneath it, because love alone could not keep her alive. The fairies who attend her christening are not whimsical figures. They represent forces meant to guard fate itself, stand-ins for fortune, health, longevity, and protection. Their blessings are attempts to bargain with the future. Then comes the curse. It is not shouted. It is not wild. It is spoken with certainty. The princess will prick her finger, and she will die. To early audiences, this was not shocking. It was expected. Children died from needles, tools, accidents inside the home. Domestic spaces were dangerous, especially for the young. The curse does not invent danger. It names the kind people feared most: small, ordinary, unavoidable, and once named, it cannot be undone. The illusion of control. The king's response is immediate and extreme. Spinning wheels are outlawed. Crafts are destroyed. Tools essential to everyday labor vanish from the kingdom overnight. This is not portrayed as madness. It is portrayed as love mixed with terror. In times of crisis, people cling to physical actions. If danger has a shape, then destroying the shape feels like protection. The king believes that removing the object removes the threat, but the story quietly undermines this belief. Spinning wheels were not rare, they were everywhere. They existed in homes, in villages beyond the castle walls, in the memories of older generations. The king can ban them from sight, but not from existence. More importantly, he cannot ban time. The princess is raised without understanding the risks of the world. She is shielded, not educated. Her safety depends entirely on the maintenance of an impossible rule. For a child listener, this communicates something unsettling. Safety that relies on perfection is already failing. If protection requires the world to never change, then it will eventually collapse. The illusion is not that the king doesn't love his daughter. The illusion is that love can control fate. The curse rewritten, not broken. In earlier versions of the tale, the curse is absolute. The princess dies, and the story ends there. Later versions soften this truth, transforming death into sleep. This change reflects evolving cultural discomfort. Death, especially of young women, became harder to present as unavoidable. Sleep allowed the story to continue while preserving its warning. But sleep is not mercy. Sleep removes choice. It halts development. It freezes a person at the moment they were last useful to the narrative. The princess does not grow, learn, or age. She exists as an object preserved for a future decided by others. This reflects a deeper fear of the time: stasis. A life paused is a life wasted. Years lost to illness, imprisonment, or social constraints were common. Sleep becomes a metaphor for lives interrupted by forces beyond control. The curse is not undone, it is postponed. And postponement is not freedom. The Tower of Innocence. Princess encounters the spinning wheel not through rebellion, but through curiosity shaped by ignorance. She has never been taught what danger looks like. The old woman is not portrayed as evil. She is ordinary, someone continuing her work as she always has. This detail matters because it removes malice from the moment. Danger does not come from monsters. It comes from the everyday. The princess touches the spindle because she does not understand its purpose. The object is unfamiliar, not forbidden in her mind. Her innocence is complete, and therefore defenseless. This moment reflects a grim truth understood by earlier societies. Children raised without knowledge are not protected. They are exposed. The tower, meant to be a sanctuary, becomes the place of her undoing. The very isolation meant to save her ensures she will not recognize danger when it arrives. The kingdom that sleeps. When the princess falls, the sleep spreads outward in waves. It consumes servants mid-task, animals mid-step, flames mid-flicker. To modern audiences, this appears peaceful. To medieval listeners, it would have been deeply disturbing. A sleeping household cannot defend itself. A sleeping kingdom cannot farm, trade, or respond to threat. Sleep is vulnerability on a massive scale. The land does not decay, but it does not live either. Time freezes, but life does not thrive in stillness. The kingdom becomes a preserved corpse, intact but useless. This reflects anxiety about stagnation and decline. Societies feared collapse not through violence, but through inaction. A kingdom that stops moving is one that invites conquest or disappearance. The princess's fate is not hers alone. It paralyzes an entire world. The waiting prince. The prince does not struggle heroically through danger in the earliest tellings. The thorns part because the time has come. This detail strips the story of earned triumph. The prince is not rewarded for bravery, he is allowed because fate permits it. This reinforces the story's central truth. Human effort has limits. Some doors open only when time decides. The prince succeeds not because he changes the story, but because he arrives at the correct moment. Anyone earlier would have failed. Anyone later would have been unnecessary. The kiss, later romanticized, is originally a narrative function. It marks transition, not affection. It ends suspension. The princess wakes because waiting has ended. Awakening without memory. When the princess awakens, the story moves quickly toward resolution. Marriage follows. Celebration resumes. Life continues. There is no grief for the lost years, no confusion, no anger. This absence is not oversight. It reflects how trauma was treated historically, unspoken, unexamined, endured silently. Survival itself was considered victory enough. The princess moves from child to adult instantly. Her life skips stages. What was taken is never acknowledged. Her body wakes, her agency does not fully return. Real warning. Sleeping Beauty is not a fantasy about rescue. It is a meditation on helplessness. It warns that you cannot outlaw fate. Isolation creates ignorance. Innocence invites danger, and that time cannot be stopped. The curse is not the antagonist. Denial is. The story teaches children that some dangers cannot be fought, only endured. That protection without understanding is fragile, and that life may pause without permission. Why the story still haunts. Modern retellings struggle to remove the unease at the heart of Sleeping Beauty. Even softened, something feels wrong, because the fear remains relevant. People still lose years to forces they cannot control. Illness, depression, institutions, expectations. People are still preserved rather than empowered, still waiting for permission to begin. The sleep has changed form. The thorns are different, but the fear of lost time remains universal. A fairy tale that does not promise safety. Sleeping Beauty was not written to comfort. It was written to explain a world where control was limited and loss was common. It does not promise rescue. It does not promise fairness. It promises awareness. And in a world governed by uncertainty, awareness was the closest thing to protection anyone had. This is the true heart of Sleeping Beauty. Not a love story, a lesson in waiting, and what waiting costs. And now the real story of Sleeping Beauty. Long ago, there lived a king and queen who had no children, and they wished for one more than anything in the world. One day, as the queen sat beside a pond, a frog crept from the water and spoke to her, telling her that before a year had passed, she would give birth to a daughter. The queen believed the words, and in time, they proved true. she bore a child so beautiful that the king could not contain his joy, and he ordered a great feast to celebrate her birth. The king invited all their friends and relatives, and also the wise women of the kingdom, so that they might bestow their gifts upon the child. There were 13 wise women in all, but the king had only 12 golden plates from which they could eat, so one was left uninvited. One by one, the wise women came forward and granted the princess their blessings: beauty, virtue, wealth, wisdom, and kindness. When the 11th had spoken, the 13th wise woman suddenly appeared. Angry that she had been insulted and excluded, she cried out that in her 15th year, the king's daughter would prick her finger on a spindle and fall down dead. Then she vanished. The 12th wise woman, who had not yet given her gift, stepped forward and said that she could not undo the curse, but she could soften it. The princess would not die, she said, but would fall into a deep sleep that would last 100 years. The king, frightened for his child, ordered that all spindles in the kingdom be burned. For many years the princess grew in beauty and goodness, just as the wise women had promised. On the day she turned 15, when the king and queen were away, the princess wandered alone through the castle. She came to an old tower she had never noticed before and climbed its narrow staircase. At the top she found an old woman spinning flax. The princess, having never seen such a thing, was curious and took the spindle in her hand. At once she pricked her finger and fell to the floor in a deep sleep. The sleep spread over the entire castle. The king and queen, returning in haste, fell asleep where they stood. Servants slept at their work, horses in their stalls, dogs on the hearth, and even the flies on the walls. The fire on the hearth died, and the wind dropped. Around the castle grew a great hedge of thorns that rose higher each year until the castle could no longer be seen. Many princes came and tried to break through the hedge, for they had heard of the beautiful sleeping princess inside. But the thorns held fast and tore them, and none succeeded. After many years had passed, another prince came to the land. An old man told him the story of the sleeping castle and said that the 100 years were nearly ended. The prince rode toward the hedge, and when he came near, the thorns turned into flowers and opened of themselves, letting him pass unharmed. He entered the castle and saw everyone asleep. At last he came to the tower and found the princess lying on her bed, so beautiful that he could not look away. He bent down and kissed her. At that moment, the 100 years came to an end, and the princess awoke. The king and queen awoke, and all the court with them. The horses stood up, the dogs leapt. The fire burned again, and the wind stirred the trees. The prince and the princess were married with great splendor, and they lived happily together until the end of their days.